The National Council of University Research Administrators welcomes you to this special webinar on the HHS salary rate limit requirements. My name is Tara Bishop. It is my pleasure to support the webinar this afternoon. Our presentation will be 1 hour with a 15-minute Q&A at the end. You are welcome to add your questions in the Q&A tab throughout the program. It's now my pleasure to introduce our faculty. Cindy Hope serves as the director for COGR's Costing and Financial Compliance Committee. Prior to joining COGR, Cindy served at the Georgia Institute of Technology, the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and Coopers & Lybrand, now PricewaterhouseCoopers. Cindy has served on the board of the Council on Governmental Relations, the Federal Demonstration Partnership, and on the NSF Business and Operations Advisory Committee. Cindy is a collaborator, a connector, and an innovator. Gil Tran serves as a senior specialist leader, grants management at Attain Partners. Previously, he served as a senior policy analyst with the Office of Management and Budget. Gil shares his knowledge and perspective generously with the community while always inspiring us to lean into why we do what we do. Cindy and Gil are both recipients of Incura Service Awards, and we are so grateful to have them with us today. Please join me in welcoming Cindy and Gil, two experts in the profession with hearts for supporting research together.
Thank you very much, Tara. And Cindy and I are so happy to be here to kind of give you the latest update. And as it's turned out, the last couple of months, probably 2 or 3 months ago, that, I've been on a circus tour a lot, including one of the Ancora, webinars on the UG revision. And lo and behold, on October 1st, when I was at a conference, giving out, the UG revision update, the question comes up about, Gil, have you heard about that HHS new policy? And I say, no. And somebody told me, walk over to me with the new HHS grant policy statement. And I read and I say, wow, this is pretty big. Got to talk to Cindy shortly after that. And we determined this is going to have a pretty big impact on the research community, on the grants community per se of that. And so we thank you, Tara and Ancora, to allow us this opportunity to bring this latest news to you. It's been almost 2 months now since the provision or the requirement is out. And although we don't have all the information on what's the proper implementation, but we can at least give you a heads up on what is out there right now, what are the requirements, and then give you some examples, and then something to look out for during the meantime. So this is all about the HHS salary rate limit requirement. Cindy and I are going to kind of split the presentation a little bit, so we're going to do a little bit of a tag team approach and bring in our comment as well. As Tara say, we will welcome your question. We do have a 15-minute after our presentation for question, but also during the meantime, the one Cindy or I who are not talking, we're gonna monitor the Q&A to make sure that if the question is appropriate to answer right there and then, we can address it, or we can address at the 15-minute latest. We will have our slide available to all the participants afterwards. So we're gonna send it out to Tara, who's gonna send it out to all the folks. So with that, I'm gonna go straight in on what the agenda is gonna be. It's gonna be tight. It's gonna be a lot of information flying at you. For the accountant, the nerdies, and the UG nerd, you're gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. I don't know, but one of those things. But you're gonna have a lot of information that coming out at you. So do bear with us and enjoy the presentation. So hang on a second. Let me advance my slide. So the agenda is very simple. We're going to give a little background. Where's that come from? Where's that come about? And then recent development, and most importantly, all the requirement. Where are the requirements mean to you? How you need to take it? How you're going to implement it? We're going to give you a little bit of implement strategies. We already have a lot of calls. Cindy at Kogus, me at Attain, we already, have grantee who come into us and what it's all about, how we're going to implement it. So we are already worked out, some of the implement strategy, and then we can communicate and let you know about that. We're going to go through a little bit exercise. That's why I say, CPAs, accounting, UG nerdy, you're going to love this because we have worked out some examples, so kind of tell you exactly in a certain situation how you're gonna go through the computation, and then there are future events that you need to look out for. As I say, this is a fluid information, but we will tell you where all of that are happening right now and what to look for very quickly. So with that, I think I'm going to turn over to Cindy to kind of take us, through the background and history a little bit.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks, Gil. As you probably guessed, Gil is going to give me the boring parts. So, that's how we work together. I'm fine with that. So, as Gil mentioned, or I believe he mentioned, or you probably know, the salary rate limitation isn't anything new. You may be more familiar with hearing about it as the NIH salary cap, but it's always applied more broadly than that. It isn't just a cap on NIH funded salaries. The actual Appropriations Act language is over there on the right, or to your right on the screen. And I'm going to read that because I think it's important for us to understand what the words say, because there are, as you'll be hearing from me and Gil later, some differing interpretations. But the words say none of the funds appropriated in this title shall be used to pay the salary of an individual through a grant or other extramural mechanism at a rate in excess of executive level 2. So in the past, we're interpreting that to mean someone paid through a grant or other mechanism was someone who was appointed to work on that grant. So like if Gil was working on an NIH grant and we put 10% of his salaries on that grant, we would need to ensure we weren't charging NIH any more than $221,900 if that is a grant that's capped at today's SES level 2. But what happened was the cost accounting services within HHS that negotiates most university and a lot of nonprofit rates, they had an audit, an HHS OIG, Office of Inspector General audit. And from what I understand happened, they were asked, can you go back to the other slide, Gil? Not quite there yet. They were asked, why aren't you applying the salary rate limitation to salaries that are in the administrative and facility and library pools? And Kaz said, well, we have this policy memo from HHS from 1990 that says that salary rate limitation only applies to direct salaries. And the IG said, we're not so sure about that. We think you need to check again. So, lots of back and forth. HHS pulled in various internal stakeholders, internal to the federal government, I mean, and the conclusion from what I understand, is that HHS Office of General Counsel said, we really can't read this as applying only to direct salaries. So at that point, HHS really had no other choice but to, come out with a revised policy that says in order to comply with this cap, we have to apply it to the indirect cost pool salaries as well. And we can go to the next slide now, Gil. So what Gil mentioned, that HHS published its grants policy statement. And so effective 10/1/24, both direct and indirect cost under applicable HHS awards. So let's say you were really lucky and you were in the process of finalizing your indirect cost rates starting 10/1/24, and because you knew this was coming, CAS negotiated a capped rate for you to use when charging HHS. Well, you're in good shape moving forward, right? You probably know what to do, but most institutions aren't that lucky. Most institutions have rates that did not take into account this salary rate limitation. So HHS has provided in its grants policy statement directions for what the rest of us have to do. So we have to identify awards where HHS funds are paying any salary that exceeds the cap, and we have to have written policies to ensure that we don't draw down any funds in excess of the cap. So as Gil mentioned, we're going to go through some examples later, but we wanted you to have the actual what the policy statement says in front of you before we get too far into that. And then next slide, shortly after HHS came out with its revised grants policy statement, which that in itself was a big surprise to many of us because they hadn't revised their grants policy statement since about 2007, I think. So we got a new grants policy statement, and I encourage you to look and see what else is in there. But NIH then came out with a grants policy notice. So instead of getting off track with their annual update of their grants policy statement, they issued a notice. One of the reasons that they had to do that is the HHS grants policy statement actually says that it doesn't apply to NIH awards. So they had to make it clear, since NIH is funded under that same appropriations language bill act as HHS, that cap applies to it too. So Gil has highlighted for us some important parts here for NIH. Applies to both direct salaries and indirect salaries. So this parenthetical here is kind of interesting, and we'll talk about that later, that says it applies to indirect salaries and then describes those as executive salaries in various uncapped cost pools. More on that soon. Also note that it applies to new and competing renewals and non-competing continuations issued October 1st or beyond. So they aren't going back and changing, your award that was issued last year. But if you have a renewal or a non-competing continuation, and of course any new awards, you're going to see this. And we can't draw down funds direct or for indirect salaries, the portion that goes above the salary rate limit. Next slide. Okay, so in summary, what are we saying here? So effective 10/1/24, new awards, continuations, etc., you have to worry about salaries over the salary rate limit in your cost pools of your F&A cost rate agreement. CAS is going to start implementing that now. So if you have recently gotten an approved or negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, it's what NICRA stands for, it should include that limit. You might want to make sure. They are not, however, going to be issuing new rates. So as I mentioned, a lot of you will be in the boat of having to wait about getting a new agreement that includes that rate limitation until your next regularly scheduled time to negotiate a new rate. So we're going to talk about what you can do in the meantime. But part of that is that you have to have written policies that limit your drawdowns to comply with that salary rate limitation. Just, based on some, anecdotal evidence from, some COGRA members, it seems like for institutions of higher education who, if you're one of those, you know that we're subject to a 26-point cap on the administrative component. And that's probably where you're more likely to find salaries over the salary rate limit. So for institutions of higher education, the dollar impact of this is likely not going to be incredibly significant, but especially on any particular grant, maybe for the institution as a whole, if you are a large research institution with a lot of HHS funding, that starts, accumulating and could be significant. Definitely will be significant for our friends in the not-for-profit organizations that aren't subject to that cap. And then, of course, if you think about HHS as a whole, it's a huge agency, and this does apply to most HHS fundings. There are a few programs that are different, get their funding a different way, but for the most part, it applies to all of HHS. And as Gil and I were talking this morning, he reminded me that it's not just HHS. Some of you may have awards from the Department of Labor that are subject to this cap. So anything else they need to know on this slide, Gil? Otherwise, I'm turning it over to you for
No,
the next slide.
that's great, and that's great, Cindy. And we already got a lot of Q&A, so let me address some of that before I move
All
on.
right. Sounds good.
To my part. The first one, Tara. There's a question whether this recording going to be available for Encora members.
It absolutely is. We're actually going to put it on the YouTube channel, so not only for Encura members, but the full community.
Oh my God, Cindy, you and I are going to be live on in eternity, to Encora.
Rock stars.
The second question is, Gil, can you explain, or Cindy, can you explain what the significance of the Game of Thrones and the House of Dragon, showing on the slide? And it's totally my fault. I put it in there because when we were dealing with this thing, I immediately thinking about the Game of Thrones and House of Dragon, because it's exactly what Cindy was saying. In the process, HHS in the process of updating their grant policy statement, for all the UG requirement, they also take the opportunity to also update, the salary rate limit. So I see this is a spin-off. The Game of Thrones is a great series, and the House of Dragon is going to be a tremendous one. So while implementing your UG revision, now you have to worry about all the spin-off, because they take the same opportunity to do that. Another question that comes in is, does it apply to defense grants? And it does not. It's only applied to HHS award only. But as Cindy was saying in one of her slides, HHS award is big. They $1.8 trillion, and they have 15 different divisions. So most of you dealing with NIH, but remember, within the HHS that have to comply with this cap is like CDC, the FDA, the Medicare, Medicaid. So it's also impact the state and local, as well. And one last question before I move on. Is an example of the cap or executive salary. So the example is very, very, very simple. In the past, as you see here on this slide, in the past, the cap is only applicable to the direct side, like the PI, the principal investigator. They can only charge the cap directly to that project. Anything above the cap, by the way, they have to include that in the research space and indirect costs allocate to it. In the past also, all the salary for the controllers, for your payroll directors, your computer directors over the cap was not capped at all, and it was all included in the indirect cost. Now that's the portion we have to worry about. And anything that got chopped off is not going. It is gone. It is not going to get reimbursable anywhere.
Yeah,
So
let me say just a little bit more about it, your example, because I think we can clear up a couple of the other questions.
yep.
This new limit isn't about your MTDC. The way your indirect or FNA cost rate is calculated, you have costs that are in administration, libraries, and facilities that are in the numerator of your rate, and then MTDC is in the denominator. As Gil mentioned, your denominator includes the PI salary and that sort of thing that we already know the cap applies to, but yeah, that's kind of cost sharing the amount over the cap, and there's debate about whether it should be in your base. But anyway, we're talking about what is in your indirect cost pools. We aren't talking about the base to which you apply the indirect cost. And someone else asked about executive salaries because NIH put that in there. I think what they're saying about that is they're assuming that if a cost is in your cost pools, it's going to be an executive.
Uh-oh, Cindy froze. Tara, you okay?
Yeah, it looks like Cindy's a little frozen there, but it's
Okay.
nice that it's a nice shot though, because that can get dicey with the freezing of the face. Um,
Okay.
Gil, if you want to go ahead and then we'll
Yeah,
welcome Cindy back. Yeah.
Cindy?
There she
Yes.
Cindy.
is.
Oh, okay, you froze a little bit, but
Oh,
you're
did I?
back.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, you go ahead then, Gil, and I'll make sure my internet is on the right one so that doesn't
Yeah.
happen again.
Yeah, that you Tara loved your steel shot though, so that was good.
It was an
One more
excellent still shot, Cindy.
yeah. One more question and I can move on. Does it apply to entity would already have a NICRA? And unfortunately, yes. As you can see, I brought back the slide, a previous slide. It say that you have to identify any HHS award where HHS funding are used to pay any salary that exceed the salary rate limit using the HHS award, include both direct and indirect. And the next one is the one that kind of like, have the triggers everything, is that you have to have written policy and procedure that ensure recipient do not draw down HHS award fund, whether direct or indirect, to pay salaries above the HHS salary rate. And before that, the beginning part is the one that say, even though you have a NICRA that effective now, and even though you have a predetermined rate that go all the way to, for example, 2017 and 2018, that sentence that say beginning with HHS award, including continuation supplemental award made on or after October 1st, HHS recipient that do not have an approved rate indicator rate that comply with the HHS salary rate limit requirement must take the two following action. That means that now you obviously any rate that you have now doesn't take into an account the over the cap amount. So unfortunately, it have to be included in there. So so what's the impact? This is with all the background requirement, what's the impact to you? And I can tell you right now, the impact is pretty high. The impact is the three things that you have to do right now, effective for any award, any new money that you receive October 1st of this year. CAS is not simply saying, CAS is not renegotiating any rate. They're not adjusting any of that. They already make it clear, and in the grant policy statement, it's also clear that they don't have to. So they are not, both CAS and ONR. So what you have to do is basically you on your own, in terms of you have to do your own exercise to calculate the effect of this salary rate limit using your last proposal that was negotiated and approved by the federal government, and adjust the drawdown accordingly. We're going to go through an example of that. The reduction, the impact going to be on rate for your admin, facility, library salary above the cap. We're going to talk about the cushion. For as a matter of fact, that's one of the the question in as well is what happened if the university already have a limitation of 26% cap. If you have a limitation, if university and you have submitted a proposal that used to develop your rate now, and it's come up to be 28%, and you are capped at 26, you basically have a 2-point cushion. So the cushion are available for university, and we're going to give you some example about that. And the third thing, I think is probably the most important things, is number 3, document the methodology that you use to revise the the rate and drawdown. And so, now this is some of the observation that Cindy and I have get through talking with the federal agency, including the HHS policy office, NIH, the cost allocation services, O&R, indirect cost group. This is our understanding. Nothing is formalized yet, but we expect that some of our understanding, that we understand that if after you do all the calculation and your impact is minimal, for example, 0.1%, 0.1%, of impacted. You have an expenditures, of $100,000, 0.1% is basically 100. I understand that in this case, the government may come out with the policy, or you can seek directly approval from the HHS awarding agency that you don't have to do anything. Is 0.1. And I have to tell you, it is in many cases that may be the things. The other thing that we understand as well is that when your institution have a fixed and provisional rate, meaning that the way the fixed and provisional work is you bill your rate stay the same, but the over or under recovery you can build into the futures. We have discussion that that the federal government may allow that. Like I say, nothing is official yet, but instead of adjusting the cash drawdown, you adjust the future rate in that case. But we want to say that until it is formalized, I would check with HHS approval for that. But that will save you a lot of things, because what is required now, if you compute a rate, a reduced rate, you have to use that on every drawdowns. My day at Georgetown University, we do a cash drawdown every week. We compute the rate, we apply how much we're going to need, and then we draw down every week. So that means you have to do this, and I'm not sure your university policy, but you have to do that may have to do it on a weekly basis. Another thing that I want to point out, service center and fringe benefit costs are costs that are hitting HHS award. Anything that charged to HHS award, you will need to develop cap rate for those. So that's in the future as well. Next slide. This is your action plan. This is the action plan. We kind of divided up into immediate action, meaning now, meaning before Christmas, before New Year, before now. Another bucket is soon, and then also some future that you need to worry about. The immediate action that you can do now is, the first thing is identify all the HHS award that made on or after 10/1. You should know that, right? And the way you identify HHS award is, I give you an example that on the bottom there. In the SAM.gov, the assisting listing numbers, all the HHS award going to start with number 93. 93 period XXX. For that example, this one is close to my heart. Well, cardio, but I have a heart issue too. So this research is important to me. Cardiovascular disease research, 93A37. That's an HHS. You may have to, in your system, design code that identify that, kind of pulled out those HHS new money that come in. And it's just not new award. It's any award that any new money, continuation, renewal, or something. HHS want to make the the most impact of it. So make a note of that. And so the first point is identify all the HHS award made after 10-1. And then you have to compute your indirect costs with the salary, the rate impact using the last time, the base year that you were using to come up with that rate. So you have to weigh all the way that, and then you using that rate to um, to revise the to revise the drawdown and do the drawdown and expenditures report again. You have to do all that until the new rate are established. And then one thing that I always say before: documents, and document. This is the one of those situations that is a little bit like is a little bit like filing your income tax, right? You have the duty of documents everything. There's some guidelines out there, but you have to document, and then there's a possibilities in the areas of income tax. There's a possibility that you may get an audit on see how you come up with it. In this case, they are 100%, 100% that you're gonna be your practice gonna be reviewed and tested during single audit. So document whatever you did with it, is necessary. Soon, not immediately, but soon, and very soon, possibly after the New Year's, you have to take a look at your service centers and fringe benefit rate. For those who are developing fringe benefit rate and submitting, to cost allocation services, they already require that for all those proposals that already been submitted, or the proposal are to be submitted, you have to have calculated the salary rate limit on it. So that's a soon requirement. And the future's action is you're going to have to implement this. You're going to implement the salary impact, on current and future indirect cost proposal with your cognizant agency, cost allocation services and O&R. Why is O&R involved in this? Because even the O&R schools receive HHS. That's why they're going to be involved in it. For example, Stanford University, they O&R school, but they had to, I guarantee you that they receive beaucoup of HHS, research money. So O&R going to be that. And it's basically what's going to happen is you're going to have two type of rate. You're going to have a rate that is capped, and with the salary rate limit, and the rate that that is uncapped. That for all the other things. By the way, Cindy was referring to other agency also have a cap. The only other agency that I'm aware of, having a cap similar and identical to this is the Department of Labor, and they have implemented this, since 2006, for both direct and indirect side. So they experience in that. The government contractors also have a cap, but guess what? Their cap is not SES level 2. Their cap right now, for 2024 is 671,000. So their cap for contractor for all agency, is pretty high. But Department of Labor and HHS are the one having the SES level cap. Cindy, do I have any question on this that I can answer now, or can I move to the next slide?
Unmute. I've been answering some, and
oh, you are.
well, I've been giving answers, typing in answers to some. What is O&R doing about its schools? I believe from what we heard at the NACA conference, similar to HHS, they're not going to be renegotiating any rates. But if you have significant HHS funding, I believe they will negotiate a capped rate with you for that, for applying to HHS awards. Is that what you also thought you heard, Gil?
Yep, that's exactly. O&R, I have contact with O&R, and they say they well, they first of all, they shock, they but then they say, okay, we're going to follow HHS and they're gonna talk with HHS. The government does have indirect cost work groups that work very closely, with all the agency, and they kind of follow each other on that. So they all in all say they're gonna follow the cue from HHS in implementing this. Okay,
So
so
there's a question, and one other before we move on. A lot of these I think we are either answering now or
mhm.
will soon. What about contracts from HHS agencies that did not include a salary rate limitation? Would those need to be included as well?
Right. So that I also researched that question. Then this does not include contracts. Even the even I think HHS have a policy out there that say that it's not applied, currently not applied to contract direct costs. So it's I assume that is not going to apply to contract indirect costs, pool, as well. But by the way, CFA is another source that you can use. CFA is the schedule of expenditure for federal award that you do single audit, and they have to list out all the HHS programs that received by that entities, all the program expenditures. So that's another source, to identify all your HHS award. One question that comes in as well is, do I need to does the rate do I need to use the reduced rate for proposal? If you what are you doing if you submitting an HHS NIH proposal right now? And the word I heard though is when you submit an NIH proposal, you have to include your indirect cost rate agreement, so you don't use the reduced rate. You use whatever your rate is now and not the reduced rate.
Yeah.
More information may come out from that, but that's the my understanding, at this point. Cindy?
Yeah, that's something I would probably want in writing, because otherwise, I wouldn't want to get accused of a cost accounting standards violation of an inconsistency between my estimate for proposing and my estimate for charging. I mean, that's intentional that you know that
Right.
you're going to use a lower rate, but again, hopefully we'll see more on that soon.
Yeah, we do have Cindy and I, been having question kind of sending to HHS office, and that was one of the questions. So some things to look out,
Yeah.
in the futures. All
So
right, so
why
like
don't we do a couple more slides and then we
okay,
can try to
yep,
answer some more questions. But I think it's an important time to say, there's more than one way to do this, and you're probably not going to find a perfect way to do this. When you propose your salary costs that are in your indirect cost pools for your F&A cost rate agreement, um, that that what you end up negotiating can be very different from what you calculated. So your salary data to support your actual negotiated rate could be very different and might not be ascertainable. If you are, let's say you're going through negotiations and they say, oh, we think that, your cost share is understated and you may, make an adjustment through your system, or we think you need to decrease your library pool for this cost. You might make it in your system, but at some point, at least if you negotiate with HHS, you probably get to a point where, let's say you proposed 58 and you currently are at 56 and they've made you run some different scenarios and you're at 57 and a half. They may say, well, we really don't want you to go up by more than a point, so we're going to give you a 57, and you agree to that. Well, it's unlikely that you go into your system and figure out what salaries do I take out of my pools to get to 57? You know, the data is not likely to be there unless maybe you're an O&R school that gets exactly what you've proposed. So, you know, you're going to have to make some assumptions. And, you know, for our purposes, I'm going to tell you about some of the assumptions that we made. And one is that the associated fringe benefits are also unreimbursable. Now, we're not saying you add the fringe to the salary and see what's over the cap. We're saying if like the example I gave earlier, if Gil is being charged to an NIH award and his salary exceeds that cap by 10%, when you reduce those salaries by 10%, you should also reduce the associated fringe by 10%. That assumption is pretty well founded. It is in an NIH grants guide notice that we have a link to here that says how you should calculate how much salary to remove for the cap and does talk about removing the associated fringe. As I mentioned, salary data supporting your rate is likely not available, but we're assuming for purposes of simplicity in our examples that it is. So keep that in mind. Our way is not going to be perfect. You may find a way to you know come up with estimates that are a little bit more accurate than what we're doing, but we had to keep it simple for an hour-long plus 15 minutes of questions webinar. So we're a lot of questions about this. Yes, we're assuming if you're over the administrative cap that you have a cushion from your calculated rate down to your 26% that you can use to avoid a reduction in your indirect cost rate that you can charge. But we're also assuming that the same does not apply to facilities and libraries. And we will show you that in just a little bit. And that one, there is still, I think, some debate going on about that, about whether there might be a cushion because of that negotiation factor that I talked about. It isn't unreasonable to think that some of that difference between what you calculated and could support and what you negotiated may also be able to be used as a cushion, but that's not what we put in our examples. Also, Gil is going to talk about a couple of examples with fixed and provisional rates. We believe that those should be adjusted the same way that they are now, that you, if you have fixed with carry forward, any over recovery in the current period would be rolled forward or carried forward into your next rate calculation. But that's not what we're hearing consistently from government representatives. So we've listed that here as one of our assumptions, but please note that we aren't saying that that is 100% a fact. It's what we think it should be. But given that the language in the HHS and NIH grants policy, or the grants policy statement and the grants policy notice say, do not draw down funds in excess of the cap. It may be that for fixed and provisional, you'll have to make an adjustment as well.
Next slide.
Yep. And I think this is still me. Yeah. So hopefully most of you have a system that you use for calculating your rates, or at least a database, and do have some data available. Gil mentioned an example this morning where, you know, the information just isn't there. So again, you know, you're going to have to do what's reasonable in your situation. But in this example, we're saying the data is the same. And that we're using a base year of fiscal year 2021. So we would look at the salaries that were in the pools in 2021 in that proposal, and also the salary rate limitation that was in place at that time, which would have been 199,300. So we would identify that, and as I mentioned, the related fringe benefits, and take that excess out of the pools, recalculate, and then look at at the materiality of the difference. So, as Gil mentioned, and as I just talked about too, if you're an institution of higher education and you have an administrative component that's over 26%, then you wouldn't have to make a decrease for that part. If you do have a material difference in what you've calculated when you combine your administrative and your facilities, then you would apply your lower rate to your HHS awards. So over on the right side, we've got some numbers to show that. Let's say you calculated an administrative component of 28 points and a facilities and library component of 30. But because you're a university, your rate's only going to be 56, the 26 plus 30. Or if you're a nonprofit, your rate would be 58, 28 plus 30. But then when you recalculated, you came up with 26.08 for your administrative pool or pools. And for facilities and library, you recalculated 28.79. So if you're a university, you can ignore that 26.08 because you're still going to get 26, no matter how much higher than 26 you calculate. For others, your rate is going to be the newly recalculated administrative component of 26.08 plus 28.79. So that gives you 54.87, but our cognizant agencies for cost do round to 1/10 of a point. So you would charge 54.9. The universities would charge 54.8. You'll see that difference between the university rate and the other rate decreased because of that administrative component. So it's bringing us a little closer together in our rates that we're charging because it's bringing the nonprofits closer down to that 26% cap that applies to universities.
Okay, so I'm going to add one more thing,
Great.
Cindy, is that do you see that on the step 2, you identify the salary rate above the salary rate limit? And in this example, if you have a base year that you use to negotiate and get your rate of 2021, the salary rate limit at that time was under 99,300 and not 221. So you need to use the base, at that time. It gets complicated though, because for simplicity, we're not including in this example because the rate increase is happened on January 1st of every year. So if you have a split year of like most universities do in terms of your fiscal year start on July 1st, half the year you're going to in one rate and half the year you're going to be at another increase rate. Pick the lowest one. Pick the one the most conservative without worry about the $3,000 or $4,000 increase. So you have the most you have the most conservative position. But by the way, Tara and Cindy, the QA line has been blowing up. It's like I never seen just an active group, and this is all the nerdy folks right here. They all know about this stuff and want to know more. So we're going to try to answer the most questions as we can. Take the one that that related, and also using the 15-minute at the end to answer some of the questions. So I have to say I'm so impressed with all the questions that comes in that really people really know. I don't know, love this. I should
Smart
say.
audience.
It's just a very smart audience. You got it. And Kura, you're the best. Okay, so just taking Cindy example, but I just want to kind of reflect showing the difference between if you are a university and if you are others. So basically for university, you have a cushion. So your new developed rate is going to be 54.79. Because you already took the 2-point reduction or whatever, and then for other institution, nonprofit, hospital, and so on and so forth, you're going to have the full 3.13 impact to reduce to reduce to 54.87. So basically, rate impact for university, reduce your cash drawdown by a new rate, reducing that by 1.21 reduction, and for other is 3.13. Now, I think you have one more slide, and then I'm gonna go into the more detail for each cost pool.
Oh, yeah, let me take this one. You're right. So let's go through a simple example. If you have an award that was issued last year and in last federal fiscal year, and you had $100,000 of MTDC and another 50,000 of direct cost that is excluded from MTDC, and an F&A rate of 56%, then of course your F&A charge would be 56,000, and you'd add those up and you'd draw $206,000 for that grant. Same scenario, but you received that award October 1st of 2024. You would have the same MTDC, the same direct costs that are excluded from MTDC, but you would apply your F&A rate of 54.8% and only draw down 204,800. So if you're trying to figure out how to do this without having to go back and figure out, well, what's in my MTDC? Because I don't have a place to put two different rates in my system. And I only have a handful of HHS grants, so I'm going to need to do this manually. Well, like we said, there's more than one way to get there. So you can back into what your MTDC is. So if your MTDC is 100, but let's say you don't know that, and that your excluded is 50, and your F&A is 56, so you have a total of 206, and you're on the back end saying, well, I see my F&A of 56,000. I don't want to have to figure out, what was in my MTDC. Well, you can take that F&A calculated amount of 56,000, divide it by your F&A rate of 56% to arrive at MTDC. And then once you have that MTDC of 100,000, you can apply the 54.8 to get it, 54,800. Subtract that from the 56,000 that you would have charged if it weren't for this rate reduction that you have to make. And then instead of drawing 206,000, you draw 204,800. Now, like I said at the beginning of this second example, I wouldn't take this approach unless I don't have a way to do it in my system and I have a small enough number of HHS awards that I can manage it manually. The reconciliation that you would have to keep up with between what you have charged in your accounting system and what you draw, what you've charged in your accounting system and what you report, and that reconciling with what you draw, I think that gets really cumbersome and is susceptible to error. So if possible, I would charge the 54.8% in my accounting system and let the rest take care of itself. Any thoughts on that, Gil, or you want to go ahead and go into some other examples?
Yeah, let's go to some example. By the way, like I say, we're going to try to answer a lot of questions, at the end, but we also only have 7 minutes. So let me go straight into the other one, the example. So in this example, we're going to get nerdy a little bit, because I'm going to take each pool, the admin pool, the O&M pool, and the library pool are the one that impacted. And for some of you already asking, what is Gil doing with, Simba and Nyla? And I want to remind you what Cindy has said in the beginning. Nothing is perfect. There's no perfect way to get there. So basically, you remember the Lion King, Simba and Nila was in the beginning was kind of running around, and somehow Simba let out a little raw, and Nyla say that sound more like a cat meow than the raw. Very very soft and everything. And my thing is for you to always remind you, for those of you who use the uniform guidance, you have to have a firm concept of the raw, right? It's reasonable, allocable, and allowable. All of that is because this is not defined, and so you have to kind of come up with what is reasonable for you. We know what is allowable and unallowable, the cap and over the cap, and also what's applicable. There's no perfect way to do it. So the three examples that I have now kind of show you that we have to use our best judgment and document that, so the auditors, when they come in and show they're going to do that. So let's go through this example right here. For the admin cost, you use the base year data. For university, you identify your cushion, what you submitted and what the versus 26. You identify the amount of salary of all the personnel for those personnel, not for the personnel above the cap. You identify the allocation that you make for research. You calculate the impacts, and then you figured out, what is your rate within the cushion. So the blue are the real math, right? Let's say that your organized research is 25 million. Your proposed is 28, so you have a 2% cushion. Number three, you identify that all the amount of the personnel that over the cap, the one under the cap is allowable. The one over the cap we identify as $2 million. We add the fringe benefit to it of 400,000. We got $2.4 million for admin. And let's say that we allocate 20% of all the admin to organized research at 20%. So basically 2.4 million multiplied by 20%, you come up with 480,000. And then you divide that 480,000 by the 25 million, you come up with 1.92% of impact. So for university, there's no adjustment needed because you already got your 2% cushion. For other, you have to reduce your cash flow down for HHS award by 1.92. Similar situation with the O&M. The O&M, now only in this case, you don't have a cap on it. You don't have a cushion on this. Using the same base of 25 million, you identify that the salary portion of all the people who work on O&M, your plan directors, your whoever, your foreman, some foreman make more than 221. You identify that portion is 500,000. You add the fringe benefit to it of 100,000, and let's say that this is heavily researched. So 50% of the O&M is to support the research space. So you come up with 300,000. 300,000 divided by $25 million is 1.2. So everybody, university, nonprofit, everybody have to take 1.2. So the next example, mostly for university, but I just assume that some nonprofit would have a library as well. Do the same exercise, right? You identify, your library director, your collection directors, everybody making more than 221, or in this case, 199, 200,000. You add the fringe benefit to it. Let's say that the amount of library allocate to research is 10%. So it's 10% of 240, 24,000 divided by 25 million. So you can come up with 0.01%. So it's very minimal, and it should be. It's a library, not a whole lot to it. So you reduce your cash flow down for HHS and FF&A by 0.1 for library. In summary, going back to our example slide, you're going to have the university total adjustment of 1.2 for O&M, 0.01 for library, and reduce it, all your cash drawdown by 1.21. And then the others is going to be 1.92 plus 1.2 for all admin, and also 0.01 for library, so 3.3. all the math should tie back, but I want to break it down. I have 1 minute here and maybe a couple more to go over what happens. So if you do the same exercise that we just go now, that but if you have a fixed or provisional rate, there's a possibilities that if one confirm or you get approval from HHS, that instead of you come up with that, but rather than reducing the cash drawdown for university, you're going to reduce the future rate. So in our case, university not going to have any adjustment for the admin pool. Other have to reduce future rate but 1.92. Same computation and exercise for O&M, and you're going to come up with everybody have to reduce the futures indirect cost rate by 1.2. We reduce for future rate. Same thing with library. Same things that so the big difference here, I want to point out, all the maths are the same, but instead of having to reduce the cash drawdown with a lower rate, the university total carry forward of 1.21 will be used to redate future rate, and others, the carry forward of 3.13 will be reduced to future rate. So I think that kind of our computation, you're going to have this, so you can work through your own system. The only difference between if you have a predetermined rate, then you have to do the cash drawdown immediately, and if you have a provisional or a fixed rate, there's a possibility that with HHS clarification or approval, you can carry that to the futures. So let's take 5 minutes to talk about this future event lookout, Cindy, and then I already have some questions that I've been collecting, and we can answer with those. So you want to go ahead?
Yeah, why don't you start then?
Okay. I basically there's a lot of things in the air right now that you need to be aware of. So one thing that we know that CAS and O&R will issue 2 separate indirect costs for the futures, one cap and one uncapped. There's a question about do you have to do that the same thing for your service center? And yes, you have to take a look at your service center and develop 2 different rates, one that charge HHS and one that charge non-HHS. Institution must develop cap rate for specialized services and fringe benefit as well. There's a question on what do you mean by charging fringe uncapped cap rate for fringe benefit? What we mean there, your fringe benefit cost is not capped. The people that end up in your fringe benefit pool. So for example, if your fringe benefit is managed by your human resource personnel, that person, directors, if he or she make more than 221, then the portion over the top need to be deducted out. Anybody who managed the benefit plans, any admin executive salary, so not your insurance costs, not your dental plan and stuff like that. The salary of the people that included in your fringe benefit have to be capped out. So you need to develop 2 rates of that. We are looking for, HHS is working on tools, for you to use, and I understand it's going to come out. They're collecting all the questions that we provide. They're going to come up with some tools. They're going to come out next year, in the beginning of the year. NIH, there's a question is, does this HHS grant policy statement replace the NIH 2024? And they say it doesn't. But NIH is already issued a similar requirement on November 14 that basically saying the same thing. So even though technically it doesn't replace NIH grant policy statement, which come out around April or so, but they already say that this is effective immediately for all the award starting made on 10/1 or after. So look out, the 2025 NIH grant policy going to have more clarification on it. And the compliance supplements is also some things that you probably going to find something in the compliance in the compliance supplements that relate to the review of all that. The single audit, I can guarantee you right now that the single auditors, when they come in and take a look at your programs, they're going to review for the revised rate. They're going to review for how you apply the rate, and they're going to review your documentation. And the reason I know that's going to happen is because if you take a look at the compliance supplement in 2024, in the research and development cluster, they already have a step in there right now. In 2024, I'd say in compensation step 2, that the review, the auditors have to have the review for any salary restriction. So the auditors already clued in that this is going to apply, and they're going to come in and review. Cindy?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there were a couple of questions about whether HHS understands how difficult this is. And I would say absolutely, and will remind you that it was a legal decision. I actually feel bad for HHS. I mean, not as bad as I feel for you having to implement it, but this is not what HHS wanted, and representatives have made it clear that if the language in the appropriation ever changes, they'll change their policy. This was not an attempt by HHS to figure out how do we shift, funding and lower reimbursements to universities. This was what they were legally required to do.
Okay.
And like Gil said, I do, I think to the extent that they can help us with the transition period by providing tools and guidance, I'm very hopeful that we're going to be seeing that.
Okay. Cindy, I think this is the end of our presentation. I think we have about 10 minutes. We can go ahead and answer all the questions. How about I take one and you
Some
take one?
questions, right? There's a lot of questions. We'll do our best.
Guys, I'm so impressed. I'm so excited to see all the questions. Why don't you take one and I take one, and we go back and forth until 3:15. So
all right. Well, to be fair, I'll start with the one that came in the earliest that we haven't addressed yet. Can you clarify if indirect costs also mean burdens such as labor overhead and fringe? So I think again we've really answered this. If it's someone that is being direct charged, the cap already applied to them. We're really talking about the salaries that make it into your indirect or F&A cost rate pools. And by the way, into your fringe benefit rates, into your service center rates. But those are separate things. We went through calculations to show you how to address your indirect cost rates.
Okay, that's good. And there's a question about whether this is going to flow down to recipient, and it's absolutely going to flow down. And there's going to be a requirement for you to make sure that, for all the war made on or after 10/1 now, for the Corona War, don't worry. For all the war made on or after, you have to, if you have subrecipient, then you have to be aware that, whatever they charge you, that somehow you get them to certify. There is a general certification that that require now for the subrecipient under the UG revision that they have to certify, but it's a general certification. Say that you comply with all the term and condition, and this is one of the term and condition. So yes, it does slow down, and you have an additional responsibility to make sure that they comply.
Yep. If your negotiated indirect cost rate is based on salaries and wages, not on MTDC, the salary cap still applies to any salaries that are in your cost pools. It's just that your base, your new denominator is different if you use salaries and wages, but you still have to make sure any salaries in excess of the cap or that excess part is taken out of the pools.
So absolutely, yes, it does apply whether you have MTDC or salaries and wage, base. Anything that hit that pool, it need to be looked at. So another question is whether the cap is applicable to HRSA award, which is already capped at 8% MTDC? And I would say no. I mean,
Oh,
yeah, you already cap it at MTDC, and the same answer goes to foreign entity as well. We did have a
that's a
lot
good
of that.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're at
for
8%. If they're limited to 8%, then you would consider that the capped pools that you're over and or they're over.
yeah.
I would say a couple people have asked about the written policy.
Hmm.
Again, I would say something is better than nothing. It might not be perfect. I would keep in mind the difference between policy and procedures. I mean, just as an example, not telling you this is what to do, but if you have a written policy in your financial policy library that says we will not draw down funds from HHS, in excess of the salary rate limitation, including in indirect cost, that's a policy. That's a written policy. Now, in practice, you're going to need procedures like we talked about with our different examples of whether you take a system approach or do it at the drawdown. And I would have those in writing too. But your written policy, especially, if you're in an institution that policies have to go through a huge, ordeal to get approved, I would keep policy part simple and then focus on what procedures am I gonna write and follow to ensure I comply.
Okay. I think this is a repeat question, but I think the we have answer, but the person have missed it. Does it apply to Department of Defense, award? And it does not. So basically, you're going to have two rate, one cap rate for HHS, all the HHS award, and one uncapped rate, for others. I already understand that in the Department of Defense, some of the award, some of the contracts anyway, don't even have a 26% cap. So, here you go. You may have three rates.
Yeah, the question does, if the cap, as you mentioned, Gil, the cap changes every year. Do we have to recalculate rates every time the cap changes? Well, no, not if you don't renegotiate rates every year, but you would use the rates and the cap in effect at the time that you calculated and proposed your rates. But if you don't have the same fiscal year as the federal government, you could be looking at two different rates in effect. And as Gail mentioned, it's probably in your best interest just to use the lower one. I mean, you could do, some, let's say your fiscal year end is halfway in between. You could potentially, do an average or something. Again, it's not gonna, whatever you do is unlikely to be perfect, but do something and document how you made your decision. And it's unlikely that you're gonna get yourself in a lot of trouble if you can show that you were being reasonable in how you calculated what you used.
Okay. There's a question here. Hello, Gil and Cindy. I see the difference in the example you share was 1.2 and 3%, 1.2% and 3%. Would you say the measurable difference standard for reasonableness apply here, i.e., would it be appropriate to only take action if 5% or greater? And I can tell you right now, the answer is no. The
Yeah,
reasonable, the
I
reasonableness.
think what we're hearing is more like if it's less than
Well,
0.1.
yeah.
So like if you currently have 59 and you calculate 58.92, then I would document that that is less than a 1 point difference. Perhaps get approval from your cognizant agency for cost. Not confident you'll get a response, but I think you have a good basis for something that is less than a tenth, a 0.1 point in your rate.
Yeah, I have proposed to HHS and NIH to consider if you have a 1 point, not in this case it's 5 point, one point that instead of doing a cash adjustment, that they can use as a carry forward for future rate, even they predetermined. And I think with that, oh my God, we are so thrilled that you have so many questions, for us, and we only able to address some. But I hope Cindy and I were able to communicate what is important to you. What are the quick way to do it. And I don't know, Cindy, I do have one more slide. So if you have any final thought, before I can share my final slide, and then we can wrap
No,
this up.
just thank you, Gil. I'm confident that our participants got a lot out of it based on, your experience. It was a pleasure to present with you, and thank you, Incura, for hosting us, and to all of our participants.
Okay, so what one last slide, one final thought I want to leave it with you, and basically that come up to me because I'm a big fan of The Wizard of Oz. I'm a big fan of. I have not seen Wicked yet, but I did see the play, so I heard it's tremendous. It's kind of remind me a little bit of this red slipper here that Dorothy have, and the reason I put it on here because it's also was in auction. It sold for $32 million or something like that. And the thought I have here, though, I know all of you, all grantees out there, from some of the questions I see, that wish, that you can have the same slipper that Dorothy have in that, so you can just click your heel 3 times and say that there's no place like home, and things gonna go back to the way we were before October 1st of time. But unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. We don't have that slipper. It's all been sold for $32 million for somebody. So we basically have to grab the opportunity, grab the requirement, grab the understanding, keep calm, and do the math. You just go ahead and go through it and document, documents, and document. And with that, I want to thank you once again. Thank you, Ankura, for having us, on the very quick basis. Tara said, "Let's do it right now." So while here, hopefully we get some good information for you out there. Tara.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's always great to get an email from Gil in my inbox. I know something fun is about to happen. So I'm like, let's do it. Well, thank you again, everyone, for sharing your time with us this afternoon. So a very special thanks to Cindy and Gil for sharing their knowledge and their perspective with us. We wish you all a great rest of your day, a very happy holiday season, and take good care. Bye-bye,
Thank
everybody.
you. All right. Bye bye.